Intellectual Gentlemen's Club.
All right, welcome back, gentlemen. We have episode 2. We had a surprising amount of downloads from the podcast. That the pilot was, when we put it on iTunes especially, but direct hits from the website, it's like 10 times the amount that I thought it was going to be. So I appreciate everybody for tuning in and supporting us, spreading out the word, sharing it, liking it on Facebook and such. I wanted to thank a couple of the users that used the Amazon link through the website. Gave us a couple bucks to cover what we got to do over here on the financial end of things. And for our sponsor tonight, we didn't exactly go corporate on this one. We're just going to go ahead and have it sponsored by Fruits and Veggies because they're delicious and you should eat a lot of them.
Amen.
Yeah, stop eating the processed foods and get some more good stuff in you. Tonight, I am Jason Abbott. I am brought to you with Toby Ellsbury.
What's up?
I'll be the co-host tonight. We have a special guest tonight. His name is Michael Fullerton. He is a member for Scientists for 9/11 Truth. He resides in British Columbia. He has a bachelor's in computer science and psychology from the University of Calgary. He's a software designer specializing in time management software, and he has studies in organizational psychopathy. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for being on with us. Tonight we're going to tackle something a little bit controversial, is 9/11 truth, myth, conspiracy, however you want to put it. There's a lot of different ways that people have described this incident, which is marked history forever, obviously. And I think everybody's under the realization that, well, maybe not everybody, but everybody knows there's a little bit something fishy that's going on with it. And I wanted to have somebody on to discuss it a little bit more in depth. Michael, you wrote a article called 9/11 Pseudoscience, a U.S. foreign policy built on fraud. Would you like to discuss that a little bit?
Okay. So this article deals with the simplest argument I could come up with relating to the science of 9/11. Basically, in science, so the most important thing in science is the notion of what constitutes a valid explanation. And that, of course, is the explanation must be supported by evidence. But what we find in the official story of 9/11, and I just kind of make things simple, I just concentrate on the key event, which would be the fall of the 3 buildings in New York, and in particular the towers. There's actually, if you examine the official story, the evidence they provide, they don't actually have any evidence at all to support the official story. So the paper deals with their attempt at that, which would be the NIST report on the fall of the 2 towers. But bizarrely, they only deal with start of the collapse. They don't explain how the falling upper block destroyed the lower building. So they actually don't have a single piece of evidence for that explanation. So if they're presenting that as a scientific explanation, that's false. That's a misrepresentation. So that constitutes fraud. That's scientific fraud.
You're talking specifically about the failed computer models, or?
No, I'm just assuming that those models are accurate, but they only deal with the initiation of the collapse, not the full collapse of the building. We're talking about the towers here, though, right?
Yes.
They did do a model of Building 7, which was a full model. I'll get into that a bit later, maybe, but with the towers, they only deal with the start of the collapse, and they did some modeling for that. And if we just assume that that is correct, it still doesn't provide any evidence for the actual collapse of the building.
Right. So, I mean, there's been a lot of interviews with the people who designed the World Trade Center, and they designed it, however many years ago, to withstand a direct impact from a Boeing 707 aircraft. I mean, multiple people among the architects that worked on the building said, "Look, this is how we designed it. We knew that this could be a problem," and yet one plane in each tower brought the whole thing down. So I think that presents a problem in and of itself. And like you said, there's just seems to be a lot missing. They're asking us to take an awful lot on faith, which is exactly what science is not, right? You're supposed to present the evidence. It's supposed to be repeatable, observable. People are supposed to be able to retest it and find fault with it, and then kind of, circle back around and make new assumptions or make new hypotheses about how it could have happened. And we're just not allowed to do that because they haven't given us anything to work on. We're just supposed to take what they've said at face value. And that's really hard to do with today's government.
Right. It's just a pronouncement that we're expected to hold as the truth. But as you said, we need an evidence-based outlook. I mean, foreign policy needs to be evidence-based. It can't be faith-based because, if you get someone with a malignant personality that ends up running the country, I mean, they could come up with any kind of explanation. We need an evidence-based foreign policy.
Let's talk about that foreign policy for a minute. After September 11th, things drastically changed, obviously. We have a large presence in the Middle East, even more so than ever before, all based on the events that happened on 9/11. So that foreign policy was dictated by the events that happened, obviously. What kind of advantage did they end up having by this event occurring?
Well, so what the event accomplished was the American people are basically a decent people. They don't want to attack a country for no reason. So in order to get them to go to war, they need to have a villain that they can that they would want to attack. So that's what was accomplished by the 9/11 event. It provided a villain that made the American people open to attacking a foreign government.
You're speaking about a false flag incident, is that right?
Right, basically.
Something that basically a lie to create a catalyst for war, is that right?
Not to put too fine a point on it.
Right.
Right, yeah, like a false flag is designed, you're blaming another entity for something you've actually done because you want to attack that entity.
So yeah, I mean, when you look at what's happened since 9/11, with using it as almost a springboard to go back into Iraq, with the Arab Spring that's happened in the last couple of years, all of these things are kind of, third and fourth order effects, but they all stem from 9/11 and our presence in the Middle East, and everybody was upset with the United States. And I think what we got out of it was exactly what we had hoped to. We got a lot of unrest. We've got people being thrown out of power. Nobody knows really what's going on. The one thing that I don't think we were counting on was that the American people would be so upset about what happened that they just haven't let it go. And I mean, that's proof tonight that we're still talking about this, 11 and a half years later, we're still talking about, this isn't right. The day of, everybody was watching, and all of the anchormen on the news around the world were like, that looked like a controlled demolition. And everybody who's seen an old building, that's what it looks like.
The crinkle in the middle.
And, it falling just straight down within itself, on top of itself, without, collapsing over like a falling tree instead of it imploding. It's just, it's crazy what they're asking us to believe. And
specifically the towers, the magnitude of how tall these buildings were, that they didn't fall, in a sideways manner in the least bit to damage anything around it. And, also with Tower 7. And a lot of people might not know a lot about Tower 7. We'll go over that in a little bit. I'd like you to discuss that because that's a big piece of the pie. I think a lot of people can overlook, the towers falling themselves, But when you look at another building that was not hit by any aircraft, that supposedly was not hit by any explosion, to just fall down, I mean, it's almost ridiculous to just believe that, a fire broke out in the building and the steel beams melted and it just fell down.
I mean, Michael, you've written a lot about Building 7's fall, and going back to both your 9/11 pseudoscience article from September of 2012, and also the one that you wrote in February of 2011, entitled "The Scientific Theory of the World Trade Center 7 Collapse." There's just a lot that fires on 2 floors just can't explain, and with their computer model, assuming a fire and going from there instead of looking at evidence and trying to build a hypothesis around what happened, they kind of started with a predisposition of fire caused this. How can we make that true? And that's kind of what the gist that I got from reading your articles, particularly about World Trade Center 7. I mean, is that where you were coming from, or am I missing the point?
Well, originally I thought Building 7 was kind of the key of 9/11, and it is a very important event because.
I'm sorry. Can you just briefly explain for those who have maybe been living under a rock and don't know what Building 7 is?
Building 7 is also known as the Salomon Brothers Building. It was a 47-story skyscraper. It was about the length and width of a football field, so it was quite a large building. And I believe it was 5 hours after the last tower fell, Building 7 fell. And
the thing that I find interesting is that nobody knows really what was going on in Building 7. And when you do any digging, it gets a little bit shady about who was in there and what they might have been trying to cover up or get rid of.
And how this fire even broke out.
Right.
Right. There was a lot of important offices in that building. Let's see, the Secret Service had an office. The Mayor's Office of Emergency Management was there. There were some other offices I can't remember, but it was like one of the most secure buildings in New York, actually. So, I mean, if that came down due to controlled demolition, I mean, it would be very difficult for someone to do that in such a secure building.
Right. I mean, just like you said, I mean, it housed the Office of Emergency Management for the City of New York. You would think that building would have a million fail-safes and be one of the sturdiest, most impregnable, fireproof buildings in the city. And yet, without being attacked, without, being provoked seemingly from the outside, it just falls down. Like you said, 5 hours after the second tower fell. I mean, what's going on there?
Right. It's a very strange incident. Yeah.
With Tower 7, I know that specifically in the larger of the towers, when they fell, they did find molten metal, pools of molten metal that had been run down the beams from different. This is something that I've heard. Did they experience that in Building 7 as well? And can you touch on what would cause something to melt steel like that? I mean, can typical jet fuel do that?
Right, that's a good point. All 3 buildings, there were reports of molten metal being seen, and some scientists have actually gotten samples of that metal, and they've analyzed it. And but yeah, like there's no way that ordinary office fires could melt structural steel like that. Right? There's just no way. It's not possible. They haven't done any experiments to show that is possible. In fact, what they do is they just ignore that evidence. And as you said before, that's not science. You can't ignore evidence that doesn't support your hypothesis. If it doesn't support your hypothesis is wrong, and you have to either reject it or change it.
So instead they go with the Jedi mind trick, just to kind of overlook that portion.
This isn't the evidence you're looking for.
This isn't the evidence we're looking for.
Right. Well, there was a European scientist who got his hands on some of the remains from 9/11 from the Twin Towers, and he did some detailed analysis at a very basic elemental level, and what he found were remains of a thermitic material or thermite. Can you explain what thermite is?
Well, thermite is called an incendiary. It basically results in a chemical reaction, and it's used to melt or weld steel. And one of the byproducts is molten iron. And in fact, the scientists that studied this molten metal, they found that it is actually molten iron. It's not molten steel. So that would be strong evidence supporting the use of thermitics in the demolition of the three buildings.
Now, what would be the purpose, say, if we wanted to bring down a building of using thermitic material? How would you do that?
Well, the main reason to use it is that it's very quiet. So you don't need a lot of explosives. If you use the thermite to weaken the steel, like every controlled demolition, you have to. First of all, every building has redundant structure. I think it's like 5 times stronger than it needs to be. And in every controlled demolition, you need to cut that steel to get rid of the redundant structure. And this will save you money on explosives, right?
Right.
So one thing you could do in a covert demolition, you could use thermitics to do that cutting, that weakening of the steel.
People, if you're listening and you have access to a computer, I just Googled cut 9/11 beams. You look in there and it shows you just a 45-degree, like a laser cut almost on these beams that are found in the wreckage. There's no way that, something can just melt off like that. It's not possible.
So one of the other things in your article, Michael, that I find very interesting, being a fan of physics, is the incidence of free fall in both Twin Towers and Building 7. Now, would the use of thermite to cut these beams and weaken them sufficiently, like you said, because the buildings are supposed to be 5 times stronger than they need to be, would that account for the ability of these buildings as they fall to reach free fall and not do a kind of a staggered fall in on themselves? Isn't that what you would expect on a fire?
Right. With a fire, a class 2 fire, you'd expect a very asymmetric fall. Like I think someone said it would fall over probably, in the direction of the weakest point. It would just fall over. It wouldn't go through itself. So, and the free fall period is very significant because there's no way that in order to have the free fall period, it was actually 2.25 seconds, which translates to 8 stories. So 8 stories of free fall means 8 stories of structure was removed. 8 stories of lower structure was removed completely. And fire doesn't do that. Fire doesn't remove. Fire can cause steel to buckle. But even when the columns are buckled, it's still going to provide some kind of resistance. But with free fall, you can't have any resistance at all. It has to be cut. And to have free fall of a building for 8 stories, every column has to be cut for 8 stories. There's no other way to do it. So, fire, it's just not possible.
Right. And so the other thing about the fire is, assuming that they're correct, is how hot would that fire have to be to really bring that building down? I mean, we're not talking about, a house made of sticks or even brick or concrete. We're talking about steel reinforced beams all the way up, like you said, all over the place, on the outside, on the inside, in the core, holding this building up, reminding everybody again that this was the Office of Emergency Management for the city of New York, the capital of the world, basically. This is where, if the crap hits the fan, this is where everybody's going to go to kind of situation room things out. And this building comes down as a result of a fire, an office fire. I mean, what material would you have to be using in a fire to get that to happen?
Yeah, I don't recall the melting temperature of structural steel, but it's quite high, and
Tens of thousands of
and there's no way that burning office contents could ever reach that temperature. It's just not possible.
Right. And I've heard reports, and you know, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist, but I've heard reports and seen reports that jet fuel, as in the most controlled circumstances, cannot burn hot enough to melt structural steel. And that presents a huge problem for World Trade Center 7, because there wasn't even a jet crash. There was nothing there. There had to have been something there capable of turning structural steel into nothing, making it from the most solid building material we have to nothing, and reducing a huge building to rubble. And that, I mean, like you said, it just doesn't hold up when you examine the evidence. And I like the way you put it in your articles. Everybody, I think there are links that you can go to, or just Google Michael Fullerton and check out his articles. He presents it very, very well scientifically, and it's crazy. You know, it just doesn't support, science just can't support this hypothesis.
Why is it that part of your article was calling out the skeptics on it? You said that the skeptics, some of the mainstream skeptics, even believe the official story, especially regarding, well, not especially regarding, but World Trade Center 7 as well.
Right. Well, as I said before, the official story has no evidence, but it's still being presented as a scientific explanation.
And what do the skeptics say? How are they defending themselves on that right there, or do they even address it?
Well, they basically they support the official story, and they say that it's scientific, but they won't respond to focused arguments. Right?
What data they're calling from?
Pardon me?
What data they're calling from?
Right, and
well, and that's part of the problem, right, Michael? They won't release the models that they used. They won't give us the data that they were working on. According to your article, nobody's ever seen, the parameters that they used, the variables that were put in place for them to build this model to explain a fire collapse of Building 7.
Right, like in Building 7, the model. First of all, there's two criteria for a computer model to be a valid scientific experiment. It has to actually model the collapse, and it has to be verifiable. And both those conditions aren't met. If you look at those models, they don't look like the actual collapse. There's these massive deformations in all of them. And the one model that looks most like the fall, they only show a few seconds, which is bizarre.
Well,
you would think that they would show that full model in entirety, but they don't. It's very unusual.
The model that I saw of Building 7 coming down, it did look like a fire would take it down. But then, like you said, when you look at the model next to the actual collapse, they look nothing alike. Like I said, the model is very asymmetrical. It looks like part of the building is falling off, and then the rest of it kind of joins later after the structure's been compromised. But that's not what happened. Everything came down all together at the same time, completely symmetrically.
Right, and yeah, a model is supposed to model reality, and their model is not doing that. So on that basis alone, we throw it out. But also, they are not releasing the data for the model that would prove that it's accurate or inaccurate.
And I love their reason for not releasing the data, and that is that it could put the public
in danger. In danger of the terrorists.
In danger of knowing the truth is more like it.
Yeah.
Well, it would endanger them for putting out such shoddy work. I think the American people, if they found out about this, they'd be quite angry and come after them.
So let's talk about them for a moment. Who benefits from this disaster, and who are they exactly? Who is the men behind the curtain? Who are the villains in this case? Who's behind the scenes?
Well, that's something that people kind of have to speculate on their own. But as you said, it's the people that are benefiting the most. And to me, it looks like certain large corporate interests are benefiting greatly. So they're the first suspects.
Such as?
Well, it looks like Dick Cheney's company was Halliburton, right? I think it's
Yep.
Yes.
quite well.
The government contractor.
Right.
So this is something that I really get behind, because as an economist, whenever you're doing forensic economics, you always have to ask, and one of my professors told me at the very beginning when I started studying economics was, you have to ask yourself, cui bono, which means who benefits? And that's where you have to start your investigation. So you look at, all right, who owns World Trade Center buildings? Who's holding the note on those things? And
Show me the money.
That's right. Who's going to get paid out because of these things? You know, what happened afterwards, like you said, with Halliburton and all of the other defense contractors and defense service providers who went over to Iraq to do what they do best, and Afghanistan also. And so, you know, you talk about the military industrial complex. I mean, that's really been a huge part of our GDP since 9/11. It wasn't nearly as large a percentage before, and since it has just blown up. And that's why everybody's starting to look around. We're starting to look for a new villain because, you know, we've killed Osama bin Laden. Saddam Hussein has been dead for years. Who do we got now? Well, we got the crazy dude over in Iran. We got the crazy dude in North Korea. We got some crazy dudes hanging out in the Middle East with the Muslim Brotherhood. And
Let's go get them.
you know, and so, yeah, they start pointing the finger at these other people all of a sudden, because now they have to justify their existence. They have to justify all this money that they've been spending for years and that they want to keep spending. And then all of a sudden their budgets get cut and they start
Gotta
crying
use the
like
budget. Use it or lose it, right?
crying like 2-year-olds because they're getting the budget cut. Now, don't get me wrong. I support the military. I was in the military. I know that we need a strong military to protect our borders, especially when it's very apparent that most of the world doesn't like us and is threatening us with nuclear annihilation, as if they actually had the cojones to do that. But, you know, we've got, like you said, you know, as a society, we need a villain in order to rally us and to justify our foreign policy. And right now we're kind of searching for a new villain. That's kind of how I feel. Like every other day it's like, oh, you know, Kim from North Korea, or Ahmadinejad from Iran, or the guy from Egypt, I can't remember his name. You know, all these guys, all of a sudden they're just bad guys, and we should keep an eye on them. And oh, what's Russia doing? And oh, what's China doing? And, you know, it's like, you know what, guys? We got a lot going on here at home that we need to fix.
Keep the eye on the pie, man.
We got a lot to fix here at home. And we got to concentrate on that first. Stop looking for bad guys and start concentrating on what's going on here.
There's enough bad guys domestically that we must deal with, you know? But that's the problem, you know? It's, you know, you put the attention elsewhere and people don't look at it. I remember... I'm sure most Americans, if not all, you know, anybody who's, I don't know, who could remember at that age, you know, the day of 9/11, you know, I felt a great sense of pride, you know, and we're going to get this, and, you know, we're going to handle this situation and all that. And it's all, you know, it was so pumped up. And over the years, you kind of start to put pieces together. And, you know, it pisses me off, man, when I read some stuff like this, when, you know, clearly the story that we're given is bullshit. You know, just come out with it. You know, let's move forward. But like you said, there's too much money out there, the corporate interests especially, you know, with the whole way that the lobbying works. I mean, they basically own our votes now, you know.
So how did this go over in Canada? You know, I've asked a couple other people from different parts of the world, but I've never talked to anybody from our neighbor to the north. You know, how was this? Was there a sense that, oh my gosh, we could be next? We're right next door, or is it, oh, those dirty Americans or those dirty guys from the U.S. They finally got what they deserved, or was there any of that? What was going on in the mind of Canadians? Not that you can speak for all Canadians, but you know, what was the sense that you got?
Yeah, the sense I got, I was a bit biased because I was quite affected by it because I was making, a lot of my customers were American, and I really liked America for that. I was making good money at the time. But what I sensed was that Canadian people were very sympathetic to the U.S. Initially, and they did whatever they could to help out our neighbor in need. Yeah, and then eventually, I think when they went into Iran, that was kind of, or not Iran, Iraq. That was kind of a turning point, and a lot of Canadians were kind of upset with that at that point, and they kind of lost this sympathy a bit.
Is that because it was pinned to Afghanistan, and invading Afghanistan was okay because they had to get rid of the Taliban, who was ultimately responsible for the incident? But when they tried to pull Iraq into it with the weapons of mass destruction, I mean, it was pretty clear what was going on there. That they didn't have any, they didn't have what they were looking for, especially after we went in there, and it was all a ruse.
Yeah, that's basically what a lot of people were feeling here in Canada.
I think that a lot of Americans, are coming to terms with that. At first, well, you can argue that Saddam Hussein was a bad person and it was a dictatorship and there was great hardships going on, and that's all true. If you look elsewhere in the world, a lot of the world is like that, except they don't have oil. Why are we not in Sudan? Why are we not in Angola?
No money in it.
Why are we not in the Congo? There's genocide going on all across the world, but you don't hear about things like that because that's not where the money train rolls.
Well, and I think honestly, I think the United States was thinking they were doing the right thing, right? So you have the director of the CIA tell the president of the United States, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, that they have, Saddam Hussein on record as saying that they have them, and that we should go in there and take care of that. But when you look at it from Saddam's point of view, which I know nobody should ever do because he's not really human because he's an Iraqi, but you look at it from his view, he's got people on the left, he's got people on the right that are kind of looking over his shoulder going, hey, you know what, I think we could take these guys. So all of a sudden he says, well, we got weapons of mass destruction, just trying to keep the Iranians off of his behind. They've already fought a long war with them not too long ago when Saddam was in charge. He remembers that, so he's like, man, I don't want to do that again. What can I say to get them
weak?
What can I say to get them off my back? Oh, hey, I got weapons of mass destruction, and you don't. Oh, crap, the Americans heard that. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble. Next thing you know, he's dead. So I mean, I'm behind you on that. I was in the Army on 9/11, and it was weird. It was very weird. And then when we went into
was everybody
Iraq,
like immediately, like when it happened, Toby, was everybody who was around you like, we're going to war, or like what was going on?
At first, when it happened, nobody knew what was going on.
Right.
And so there was just a lot of confusion.
At the end of the day, there was a lot, and everybody kind of
by the end of the day and into the next week, everybody kind of figured out what was going on. And
we're gonna go kick some
Fort
ass,
Bragg,
right?
which is one of the largest military installations in the country, and was very open at the time, got locked down, and that was no easy feat. And we couldn't get on or off post, and basically wherever you were, that's where you were going to stay until they decided that it was safe to start opening it back up to traffic. And it was really strange. And I was a new father at the time. I'm holding my 8-week-old baby, and I'm thinking, oh crap, what did I just get her into? And it was a strange time. We're all looking around like, all right, boys, this is it. We got somebody to go beat up again, and that's what we did.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've heard some arguments, I'm sure, from your articles that you've written, Michael. When people talk about when they try to rebut any kind of story that you're telling them about, what possibly had happened there, what kind of arguments do you hear usually?
Well, all the arguments involve some kind of a logical fallacy or falsehood. Let's see.
What logical explanation do they give for the towers coming down? I mean, because like you said, the official report doesn't really cover it. So what do people give when they say, no, that it wasn't controlled demolition?
Or is it just sufficient for most people?
Or people just believe the cover story that we've been fed?
Yeah, they just point to the official documents like the 9/11 Commission report, which actually doesn't have any technical details.
But the 9/11 Commission report, especially on on Building 7, doesn't even explain necessarily other than a 2-story fire, correct? Is that the official story in the 9/11 Commission?
Yeah, the report doesn't deal with any technical explanation. They just, state what happened and provide some recommendations. They don't really explain anything. It's the NIST reports that were the most sciencey attempts at providing explanation.
And who is NIST?
So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I believe some division of the Commerce Department, or anyway, they deal with like scientific and engineering standards and that sort of thing.
So this has crossed my mind once or twice. Wouldn't you, in the case of a structure coming down, talk to somebody who knows something about structures? I mean, if they would have brought in the Army Corps of Engineers to do this analysis, I'd have said, all right, you know what, these guys know what they're talking about. But the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or whatever, is that what it is? National Institute of Science or Standards and Technology?
Yes.
Why would they call those guys in?
Well, they do have a lot of competent scientists and engineers on staff. So it's I guess it was fairly, it was all right to use them. I mean, I can't think of any other organization, any other government organization that would be able to do that. So I think they were fairly competent. It's just that what they produced is pseudoscience.
So,
not science.
Have you read any other reports from disasters, whether man-made, war, whatever, or natural, written by NIST? And is this at all, representative of their usual work, or are they much more scientific usually?
I can't really comment on that. I haven't read any other documents.
I think that's something that we need to do, and maybe do a follow-up on this, and do a little compare and contrast, and look at some other things that NIST has put out and say, hey, you know what? These guys are usually a lot better than this, because it would surprise me greatly if we looked at another NIST report and found the exact same kind of shoddy, unscientific work in other reports, because across the board, whether you're talking about the FAA, whether you're talking about FEMA, whether you're talking about NORAD, whether you're talking about the executive branch of the government, nobody played their role the way they were supposed to in this thing. And since then, nobody has stood up and said, you know what, we made a mistake, or yeah, we really dropped the ball on that one. Everybody's just kind of stood by the official theory, trying to cover their fourth point of contact, and which for all you dirty, nasty legs is you're behind. And nobody's coming out and saying, man, we really could have done a better job. Everybody's saying, well, we could have, we never saw this coming. We couldn't have possibly seen this coming. And I think that if we looked at other NIST work, I think we would find a huge amount of discrepancy between the 9/11 reports that they did and the other stuff that they did. I would be interested to hear a scientific comparison of their usual work and what they did for 9/11.
Oh, someone had mentioned the Herrick paper, nanothermite paper, and actually, so a lot of the people at NIST are actually the world experts in nanothermite, so they are very competent people, and they produce some good papers on nanothermite. So that's some evidence there that they actually are quite good.
Okay, so riddle me this, Batman. Why would you bring in the world experts in nanothermite on a case of buildings falling down because planes crashed into them?
Well, so these experts, they're just some of the people that work at NIST. But it is a bit suspicious that they're involved in that work, but yet they're not looking at thermitics as a cause for the collapses.
I think a potential reason that they were brought in to do this specifically was so that they could keep their eyes and ears on those thermitic material experts and be able to edit and control what was coming out. just a
That's
hypothesis.
interesting.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
I wanted to talk also about some of the other displays of 9/11 information, specifically the Zeitgeist movie. I know when we were going back and forth in our emails a little bit, you expressed a little bit of concern with that. I found the movie, all of the movies, actually very compelling. And don't take my word for it. I haven't fact checked everything, obviously. But the evidence that was presented before me, it was, like I said, very compelling. But you're concerned with a little bit of disinformation. Can you go over that? What exactly you meant?
Well, actually, Zeitgeist is what got me started. That's the first movie I watched about this. But when I researched some of the claims in the movie, I found out that they were quite wrong. Not so much as in the 9/11 stuff they were talking about, but some of the other science they presented was just wrong. So I kind of don't trust anything that is said in the movies.
And for anybody interested, I mean, you can watch it on Netflix. You can go on Amazon,
YouTube,
and get most of the Zeitgeist stuff. And it's spelled exactly the way it sounds, Zeitgeist. And there's like 3 movies, and they talk about a variety of subjects. And in the first movie, I think it was put out in 2007, it tackles 9/11 specifically, and it takes the 9/11 Commission report apart rather systematically. There's another movie though that's also available on Netflix that or a documentary, whatever you want to call it. It's called 9/11 Loose Change, and it goes into quite a bit more detail about some of this stuff. Have you seen that one, Michael?
Yeah, that was probably the second movie I watched. Yeah.
What did you think about that one and some of the findings that they presented?
Well, that was I was very impressed by that. That kind of really got me going. So, they were just college kids. They wasn't very polished, but they got out some of the information, and that was very important. A very important movie for the start of the 9/11 Truth Movement.
And I think any of these movies, really, what they do is they bring out the inconsistencies, right? So they say, this is what the official report says. This is what happened. I can't get from A to B here. And I think that's really what people are like, you know what? If you could fill in the gaps and make me get from A to B and this work, I'm all for it. But you know what? They just won't. It's not that they don't even try. It's just they just won't. Nope, we're not going to address that. Nope. Next question. Nope. And they just cut anybody off who tries to get, anybody who is in officialdom at the time will not go on record. Even, President Bush and Vice President Cheney decided that they didn't want to go on record when they met with the 9/11 Commission.
Together.
They had to meet together. They totally set it up how they were going to do it. And I think
no transcripts.
Huge problems with the way the investigation was run on the official side. But it's the inconsistencies that drive me crazy. It's as a soldier, I want to believe that the government is doing right. As a voter, as a taxpayer, I want to say, my government's taking care of me, but I'm just not getting there with what they've said. And it's those inconsistencies, whether it's Zeitgeist or 9/11 or Loose Change or any other organization. I think what they really point out are the inconsistencies, and that's what we really have to get somebody to answer for, because 3,000 people, Americans and others, lost their lives on September 11th, and I think their families deserve the truth. I think the American people deserve the truth, and it really gets under my skin to think that our government, it's not that they can't, it's that they won't even address it.
Let me ask you a question, Michael. I kind of want to jump over to some other studies that you like about psychopathy and sociopathy and ponerology. I hope I said that correctly. Do you think that the American government or most governments falls in that category?
That's what the current research seems to suggest, that any kind of organization, whether it's political, business, even religious, the people at the top, they're more likely would be these malignant personality types like psychopaths or narcissists. So that's the kind of people that are they're more likely to be those type of people when they're at the top of these organizations.
So when you say they have a malignant personality, or that the organization tends to take on a psychopath or to show signs of psychopathy or something like that, what does that entail? What are we looking for in a psychopath or a sociopath?
Okay, so with a psychopath, there's a list of characteristics, and they need a certain number of them. I hope I remember all of them. One of them is charisma, so they have a way to make themselves appear likable, and for example, they will be very verbal. They can speak very well. They don't stumble on their words. They're not nervous at all. They don't have any kind of mental illness, no depression, no anxiety. They make pronouncements, so they just state things and expect people to accept them as truth. And it's interesting because they state them with the utmost confidence, so people kind of just do take it as truth. They don't question it. They are very manipulative. They can get people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. But the main characteristic is that they're completely self-serving. They don't care about others. They see them as objects for their gratification or obstacles in their way, and they don't have any connection with them at all.
Kind of sounds like you just described a corporation.
Right, and that's, there's a great movie called The Corporation, and it basically compares large corporations to psychopaths, and they match all the qualities perfectly, pretty much.
Well, when you have this malignant personality controlling an organization, that's the way the cookie's going to crumble, I guess.
Right, exactly. Their characteristics are projected onto the entity they're controlling.
And so, what are some examples of the way either the U.S. government or some of these organizations have acted that would lead you to believe that they're demonstrating psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies?
Well, when you look at politicians, they're always charismatic. They're always lying. Everything they say is basically a lie. They make all kinds of promises. They never keep them. Look at President Obama. Look at all the promises he made. He didn't fulfill, I don't think, any of them.
I'm going to cut the budget in half in the first 4 years.
Yeah,
or not the budget, the deficit.
Right, he was going to get out of all the wars, but that hasn't happened.
Guantanamo was going to close, too.
Oh, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close Guantanamo.
First order of business.
Yeah, that was a whole lot of pillow talk, I think. When and don't try to tell that to anybody who voted for him, because they're President Obama's great. Well, what has he done? Did he do anything that he set out to do? Oh yeah, he brought hope and change to America. Oh, he did? What? How's that? Here's what he said he was going to do. Here's what he's done. It's not really linked up there.
I think the problem is larger than an individual. I believe that most people get involved in politics for, to do the greater good. I think that they get gobbled up by the system. I think just like anybody else, you have people who want to be a cop and, they go to the police academy and they go through the whole song and dance and they realize this isn't what it's like. Same with joining the military. I've heard the same thing. Any kind of, line of work you jump into, you're going to find out that there's things, later on that you weren't aware of.
I wish I could believe that. I really think that a lot of the people who get into politics know exactly what they're getting into, and what's going to be expected of them, and what they're going to have to do in order to succeed. And I think there's just no getting around the fact that the way that the system is set up right now, I think they see, the fact that they can manipulate people, they can be on TV, and hey, look, Mom, I'm on TV. but they also get to, force feed their ideas on an entire populace, which, like you said, that's part of it being a malignant personality. You want to kind of grow your ideas and make everybody believe them. And I think, politicians really just, there are some, I think, that genuinely want to try to do good and either get choked out by the system or something along those lines, or really try to stay true to themselves throughout their career. And there have been some that have over time. They're few and far between, but they're good, honest men and women. But I think the overall majority know exactly what they were getting into, and that they're in it for themselves, and they're in it for the money, they're in it for the retirement, they're in it just to hear themselves talk.
I think a big problem that we have with government is that it's at least in the United States, it's a two-party system. But they're really not that different from each other. I didn't vote Democrat or Republican this time. I had to go Libertarian, just because a lot of the ideas resonated with me. I voted for Obama the first time, and I didn't care to vote for him again because it's just more of the same, especially after things like NDAA passing. Just an extension of the the Patriot Act after 9/11. That was another big ticket for people to run with that. I mean, whoever is benefiting from the Patriot Act, you can look directly at the 9/11 incident, and I'm sure that follow the money train.
Yeah, and if you go back in U.S. history and you read some of the Federalist Papers and what our founding fathers warned us against, dollars to donuts, we are 99% in the exact opposite way that they had hoped we would go. They didn't want a two-party system. They didn't want to print paper money. They didn't want a central bank. They didn't want all of these things that we have and that they warned us against. And they said, if this happens, beware, because it's the beginning of the end. And you can make a checklist of things that they told us not to get into. And that's exactly where we went.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, the founding fathers, they understood the problem, the honorology problem. They saw what was happening in England, these nasty people running England, and they didn't want any part of that in their new country. So they drafted this wonderful document to prevent that, but now it's kind of in tatters.
Well, and that's the thing that drives me crazy about 9/11 and the things that have happened since, is that the Constitution, which I believe to be a divinely inspired document, has just been used and abused and thrown away and discarded, and everybody's like, oh, it's outmoded. That's not, they couldn't foresee the problems that we would have today. That's crap. Human nature hasn't changed in millennia, and
greed is still greed.
We're basically wired for two different things, and that's fear and greed. And they saw that and they knew it, and that's why we have all these warnings. If you look back, central banks are bad, paper money's bad, two-party systems are bad. All these things that we have, they warned us against. And if they were so outmoded, how could they see ahead to tell us that those things were bad? I mean, when you look at, it's kind of like when you're a kid and you're like, and your mom comes to you, all right, do you want asparagus or Brussels sprouts? Like, oh man, neither. Well, you got to eat one of them. Well, that's how I feel when I go to the voting booth. I don't want either one of these clowns, but I'm voting for the one that I like, or that I hate the least.
You're voting the lesser of the evil.
Exactly. Right? But either way, you're still getting evil.
Yeah.
And with 9/11 and like Jason was talking about with the Patriot Act and NDAA, I mean, these are people that, these are things that have just taken the liberties and the freedoms that the founding fathers died for and bled for, and
countless Americans.
And they just gave them away. They just let them slip right through all of our fingers. They just decided for everybody that, you know what, we're going to be able to get rid of the Fourth Amendment. We're going to be able to get rid of the Fifth Amendment. We're going to take away your freedom of speech. We're going to take away your guns. We're going to take away your ability to govern yourselves when you're talking to the states. And they say, we're going to make all these decisions for you. And that's just the way it's going to be from now on. And I'm not down with that at all.
Well, I think a big advantage of, the technological revolution is social media and the immediate access to information. I mean, we live in an information age now. I mean, my kids are growing up with, iDevices at their arm's reach. They can find out any question they want within seconds. And a lot of that's bullshit too. Okay, you got to look out for that. But there is so much information available; it's astounding.
So that's the thing with 9/11 though, is it's basically just an outcropping or just a branch of this ridiculous government gone wild when they just say, you know what, this is the story. You just have to believe it. It's what we're telling you. That's it. No questions. Have a nice day. And I just don't accept that. That's not the way we were founded. And I think people need to ask questions. I think we need to keep asking questions. I think they're hoping that we're just going to get sick and tired of asking questions about 9/11. And the same thing is they're hoping that we're going to get sick and tired of asking questions about Benghazi. But you know what? I don't think we are, because I think the people a lot of people are starting to wisen up, and they're starting to pay attention and say, hey, you know what? That's not the way it went down. That's not what I saw. That's not what I remember. And despite the fact that they're waving their hands and putting up smoke and mirrors, oh no, that's what happened. This is what happened. No, that's not what happened. I was there. And I think people are starting to wisen up to that. And I think eventually we will force some answers out of somebody. Or if we don't, I mean, we're so far down the rabbit hole, there's just no turning back.
Right, and I think two things that we really need to do is to start educating people about how to reason critically, and that needs to start in school, right? Starting in kindergarten even. How to reason critically, how to always favor an evidence-based explanation, and how to spot malignant people. These are the two things I think are fundamental to preventing these sort of things happening.
These malignant people that we were discussing, how do you identify them? And well, I guess it's a couple of questions here. How do you identify them? Is it a nature or nurture or a combination of both? And what do you do about an individual like that in our society where there's a very real danger of them hurting somebody else?
Okay, well, so they all have similar characteristics. You have to kind of commit those to memory and just kind of look for them. But you have to bear in mind that you can't say for sure that someone's a psychopath and someone's a narcissist. The only way to do that really is to run a psychological test on them, or perhaps like an MRI scan. But if they act like a psychopath, you have to think that maybe they are one.
If it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Right. And then you use the techniques against them, because you'll find that they are effective with them anyway. It doesn't matter if they are a psychopath or not, these techniques.
So you say to run a person through an MRI. So are you saying that this is an identifiable property that's within the brain, or is this something that someone's nurtured to be?
Absolutely. You can take a functional MRI test of a psychopath or a sociopath's brain, and it acts very different under controlled stimuli than a quote-unquote normal brain.
That's interesting. I wonder, and it's always like that, or is that a change that's made? And that's part of the personality, so it's probably the development of the brain, right?
It's both, right? And so you
can nurture it along a little bit, but
right. And so there are people who are, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but there are people who have been diagnosed psychopaths who are not killers, who aren't, cutting people up and shoving them in freezers, that live perfectly normal lives because they had a good, loving, nurturing environment growing up. But it's the ones that don't, or that give in to those urges or temptations or that those natural inclinations that they're born with because of their psychopathy, that sets them loose. Is that about right, Michael?
That's pretty close. Like, there are people that are born with this physical anomaly, and they're going to become psychopaths no matter what. If they're in a bad environment, they might become very violent, as you said, or have a poor impulse control. And then on the other hand, you can have a fairly normal person that's put in a horrible situation, like maybe, I don't know,
some sort of abuse or neglect.
Right. Or something like that.
Well, it's kind of complex, but like, for example, maybe in a war-torn country, they might be exposed to some horrific events, and that will kind of stunt their emotional growth. But it seems to be more of a genetic thing. They're kind of born that way.
I saw an interesting documentary on this once, and there was one of the lead scientists had a functional MRI done of his brain as a control subject, and it turns out he's a psychopath. And he was astounded by the fact, but then when he looked back, he said, you know what? I had great parents. I had a good environment. That's probably why I'm not a serial killer. But he was studying all these serial killers and people who had done these horrific things. And he's saying, but when he looked close, he started to see some of those tendencies in himself. He had a short temper. He had a tendency to blow up over stupid things and let things kind of set him off that shouldn't. And he said, man, it's like, you know what? If my parents weren't as good as they are, and I know that's just not cool to ever say that your parents did a good job raising you, but he said, if my parents hadn't done such a good job, I could have turned out just like Jeffrey Dahmer or Timothy McVeigh or name the psycho. I mean, and I think that was crazy that the guy who's doing the study turns out to be a psychopath, but one that had been nurtured well, I guess you could say, and didn't turn out to be one of these serial killers or Hitler types or controlling whatever example you want to use. But it's just it does go back to the nature versus nurture argument, and like you said, that you can have these traumatic events that stunt your what basically comes up to, we call it emotional development or whatever, but there's a physical development that's going on in the brain that gets affected when these events happen at a very young age, and that lasts throughout your life. And I just don't see how we can let these people who are running our country, show these kinds of signs, and nobody's crying, hey, you might want to take a psychological evaluation. And I mean that should almost be a precursor to being on the ballot, I think, these days.
Let me ask you a question, Michael, just on statistics. What percentage of the general population would be considered a psychopath or a sociopath? And what percentage of Washington, D.C. would you think, how much higher would that be?
Well, conservatively, they estimate about 1-2% is a psychopath, full-blown psychopath.
That's one in 100. So you have 300 Facebook friends, 3 of them are psychopaths, right?
Yeah, but other people think it's higher, but conservatively, I think that is fairly accurate.
All right, so you extrapolate that out into a population of 350 million, and there's a few psychopaths out there.
There's quite a few.
Right, and not all of them are in prison. There's only what is it? I think something like 10% end up in prison. So
90% end up in politics.
Yeah. Well, see, there's different levels. There's the thug type, which will usually end up in prison or get killed off at a young age.
Or end up as the mayor of Chicago or Detroit.
Yeah, and then there's the charismatic type that do well in, for example, sales, politics. And the worst type is called the puppet master. So they end up kind of controlling organizations behind the scenes often. So they're the worst type. And there's probably, we know least about those types, that type, I should say.
Okay. Well, we're past our hour mark here. I want to thank you, Michael, for joining us today. And it's obviously a controversial subject. I appreciate everybody tuning in for this. I realize that you might not agree with everything that we've said or anything that we've said, but I hope that you've come in with an open mind. That's pretty much what the Intellectual Gentlemen's Club is about. I'd like to take us out with a quote from Carl Sagan. I read it today. I put it on the Facebook page. It just kind of tied everything together a little bit. Is one of the saddest lessons of history is this: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we've been taken. once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back. So I think kind of the lesson for today for me was, and over time, just because I think something to be true, it doesn't mean I need to close myself off from other ideas that may or may not be other truths that are out there. So I thank everybody for coming with an open mind here today. Toby, thanks for joining us again today.
Always a pleasure.
I'll be back again. You will be able to find Michael Fullerton through the description in either the podcast or on our website. I'll have a link to a couple of articles that he's done. Hopefully we'll get a picture up there so you can see all of our beautiful faces. But we'll have that information up there when it's released. Come on and you can join the discussion with us. You can visit our website, intellectualgentlemansclub.com. I'll have a couple blog posts on there every once in a while. In addition to the podcast, you can listen directly through there. You can... if you
have ideas, you want to come on, give Jason a shout. We're entertaining all comers.
Yeah, we have a couple interesting people that are lined up for the next few weeks. It'll be a little bit controversial subject again, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that. You can visit us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. I try and put some stuff on there every once in a while. We're on Twitter at IGCcast. I'll have the podcast up on YouTube as well. You can support us if you'd like. We always appreciate getting a couple dollars in to cover the light bills and such. We have a donate button directly on the website. It goes right through PayPal. It's very very convenient. We have some ads on there from Google you can click on. Usually they're bullshit, like I said, but a couple clicks generate some additional funds for us. Use our Amazon link on the homepage of the website. If you have something in your wish list you want to buy, just go ahead and head on over to the website of ours, and we'll have an Amazon link. You click on that, brings you right to the Amazon portal. It costs you nothing extra, and we get somewhere between 2 and 8% of your purchase at no cost to you. So it works out for everybody. We're open to sponsorship ideas. If anybody's out there that wants to sponsor and take over for fruits and veggies, we're more than welcome to entertain that.
Eat your broccoli.
Yep. Everybody who likes and shares on Facebook pages and Twitter, we really appreciate that, getting the movement out a little bit. And I guess that's it for episode 2 of the Intellectual Gentlemen's Club. Join us for number 3. Again, thank you to our guest, Michael Fullerton. Check him out. And we're signing off until next time.
Take it easy. Ask questions.
Thank you, guys.